We will go around the room, but it's very nice to see everyone here. Start? Hi, Robert. Okay. Is everyone in?
Mike, you're over here.
Hey. Barbara. Good morning. I'm Jane Harmon, the President and CEO of the Wilson Center, and it is my pleasure to welcome Prime Minister of Lebanon, Saad Hariri, back to the Wilson Center and to thank him for his enormous generosity to the Wilson Center. Special thanks to Wilson Center scholar Amal Mudulali. Where is Amal? Right there. For arranging this conversation with her friend, Saad Hariri, and a very warm welcome to two Wilson board members, Jane Stetson, who is where? Right there, Natalie Reyes, who is there, and our former board chair, Ambassador Joe Gildenhorn, who remains to all of us a huge mentor and supporter. I've had the opportunity to meet Prime Minister Hariri several times, both in Lebanon and in Washington, while I was a member of Congress. I was also in Beirut just a few weeks after his father was tragically assassinated, and I visited the makeshift gravesite there and reviewed the horrific attack that struck the most beautiful part of one of the most beautiful cities on the planet. Beirut has been, over time, the site of devastating terror attacks and major attempts to attack American targets. I'm sure everyone remembers what happened to the U.S. Embassy and the barracks bombings. It's a grim history. That violence has been a tragedy for America and a tragedy for Lebanon. A nation with a proud history of pluralism and a government that, unlike many others in the region, reflects the diversity of its people. Prime Minister Hariri led his nation through many of the turbulent times, and he's here today to offer his perspective on the record, on his country, and on his neighborhood. On this visit in Washington during our first and possibly last week of spring, he met, this is a very sad observation, he met with Vice President Biden, Secretary Kerry, National Security Advisor Susan Rice, and I'm not sure whether you can discuss those meetings, but everyone would be interested. We look forward to hearing your reflections on whatever you would like to talk about, and then to open this meeting for questions from a very, very sophisticated audience. And let me suggest that before you make any remarks, we quickly go around the room and identify ourselves. And to my left, I'll just say, is Hala Esfandiari, who is the rock star director of our Middle East program. And Hala, thanks for your contributions today also.
Thank you very much.
Identify yourself. Just here. Pass this around as much as here.
Basim Sabah.
And your affiliation, just say your affiliation.
Advisor to Minister Saad Hariri.
I'm Nader Hariri, Chief of Staff to Saad Hariri.
Jane Stetson on the board, Wilson Center board.
Okay. Speak up.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Natalie Reyes, board member of the Wilson Center.
Cristobal Alex, President, Latino Victory Fund.
Robert Litvak, Vice President for Scholars at the Wilson Center.
Aaron Miller, Wilson Center.
Max Rodenbeck, I'm a visiting fellow at the Wilson Center.
Marina Ottawa, Wilson Center.
Joseph Soom, visiting fellow here.
Hisham Melhem, just a journalist.
Steve McInerney, the Project on Middle East Democracy.
George Cody, American Task Force for Lebanon.
Blair Rubel, Vice President for Programs at the Wilson Center.
Paul Janaha from the BBC.
Barbara Slavin from the Atlantic Council.
Chase Solomon, Foreign Affairs Correspondent for the Wall Street Journal.
Hi, I'm Les Campbell, Middle East Director at the National Democratic Institute, or NDI.
I'm Margaret Warner, the Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent for the PBS NewsHour.
Robert Worth, Wilson Center Fellow and former Beirut Bureau Chief for the Times.
Scott Mastick, I'm the Middle East Director at the International Republican Institute.
Peter Tanis, I'm Chairman of Links Investment Advisory and the founding Chairman of the American Task Force for Lebanon.
Mike Van Dusen, Wilson Center.
Rafiq Bizri, President of Hariri Interest, U.S.
Caroline Skellen, I'm the Vice President for External Relations here at the Wilson Center in Hoya Saxon, Mr. Prime Minister.
أمل مدللي, Advisor to Mr. Hariri and a scholar at the Wilson Center. Thank you.
Armin Chokshi, National Cabinet at the Wilson Center.
I'm Ghazaz Khouri, Advisor to Prime Minister Hariri.
Ambassador Gildenhorn, former chairman of the Wilson Center.
I'm Antoine Shadid, Ambassador of Lebanon to the U.S.
Okay, and we have two more, BBC. Barbara Platt-Usher.
And Saad Hariri, just a former Prime Minister.
Maybe, like me, you're a recovering politician, except I have a sense you might be a returning politician one of these days. So, everyone, please welcome Prime Minister Saad Hariri for some opening comments, and then we'll go to questions.
Good morning. I want to thank President Jane Harman for receiving me at the Wilson Center today. I would like also to thank Dr. Hale Isfandiari, the Director of the Middle East Program, for hosting this event. Since I visited DC last in January 2011, we have witnessed a string of Arab revolutions, 3 ongoing regional wars, the assassination of 2 of my closest friends and collaborator, Wissam al-Hassan and Mohammed Shatah, and an unprecedented rise in terrorism and rapid expansion of Iran's sphere of influence in the region. Today, the Arab region is faced with 2 major challenges, which seem to be feeding off each other. On the one hand, Iran expansionist policies have led it to interfere in Bahrain, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine, to name a few Arab countries. On the other, extremists and jihadists claiming to fight in the name of Islam are threatening to destroy the very fabric of society. How both threats feed off each other is clear. Iran allies, the former Maliki government in Iraq and Assad in Syria, have orchestrated the release of jailed elements of Al-Qaeda by the thousands, that later established what is now known as Daesh or ISIS, with the Assad army going as far as handing over the oil province of Raqqa to them, now their stronghold and launchpad. Of course, Maliki and Assad and Iran, behind them both, wanted to reinforce the threat of jihadists and recognize as ramparts against such extremism. No one should fall into this trap. Jihadist extremism, in turn, is counting on widespread Arab anger and frustration at Iran's expansionism and intervention, accusing Arab governments of inaction, to gain sympathy and support. This is why it is essential that the ongoing fight against ISIS is accompanied by clear action and perception that the Arab will no longer tolerate Iran's hegemonic behavior. Operation Decisive Storm carried that precise message. It is important to note that both Iran and ISIS have used the Palestinian cause, and particularly the accusation that Arab traditional establishment has been unable to resolve the Palestinian issue, as a pretext for their onslaught against Arab society and governments. Once again, it remains essential to deny them both such argument by putting an end to the unjust suffering of Palestinians through a 2-state solution. In Lebanon, we are faced with many challenges, stemming mainly from the fact that we lie on the fault lines of, some would say, civilization, religion, schools of thoughts, ideologies, egos, and in contradictions, which is why the friction of the region are often manifested in my country. My only priority remains to protect Lebanon. I hear many in the international community often repeat that given all that is happening in the region, Lebanon is still in a good place. At least there is some relative stability. However, this stability is not sustainable unless state institutions are strengthened and the war in Syria is resolved. Lebanon is important. First, because the Lebanese have suffered civil war for a long time, and long before the current regional conflicts erupted. Therefore, the Lebanese have first-hand experience in ending civil war, reconciliation through the Taif Accord that protected the minorities, reconstruction, and rebuilding state institutions. Lebanon is a model to be maintained in the region. We, the Future Movement, are doing everything we can. We have said clearly that we will never allow civil war to return to our country. We will never resort to violence, no matter what, despite the fact that we are only faced with violence and assassinations. And we have clearly stood by the side of justice, moderation, and state institutions in the fight against terrorism and extremism. However, if the current status quo persists, it will become increasingly difficult to prevent the flames of the region from igniting civil strife in Lebanon. This can only be reversed if the different Lebanese groups follow and implement a clear set of steps, while the international community in parallel commits to ending the war in Syria. First, we need to elect a president. A vacuum in the presidency is very dangerous and contributes to the paralysis of all state institutions. This false sense of business as usual without a president is very dangerous. Second, we need to stress and abide by the Ba'abda Declaration, which calls for neutrality of Lebanon in the Syrian conflict. Third, we need to fight all sorts of extremism, Sunni or Shia. To do this, there needs to be a clear international policy to support the voices of moderation in the region. Bashar al-Assad is no voice of moderation. He is the factory that manufactures extremism. There are no more than 40,000 ISIS and Nusra fighters in Syria, including thousands from around the world, versus 20 million moderate Sunni Syrians. Do the math. Support the mainstream, and they themselves will get rid of the terrorists. Unfortunately, Hezbollah involvement in defense of the Assad dictatorship in Syria has imported terrorism to Lebanon. We argue that the Lebanese security agencies, namely the Lebanese armed forces and the internal security forces, need to fight against terrorism, which is why I am doing everything in my capacity to provide support and assistance to them. This said, we are currently in dialogue with Hezbollah, and our dialogue aims at diffusing tensions in the country. However, on key issues such as withdrawing Hezbollah fighters from Syria and electing a president in Lebanon, Hezbollah will only listen to Iran. Fourth, we need to address the issue of the Syrian refugees in Lebanon. When a country of 4 million has 100,000 refugees, it has a refugee problem. But when it has 1.2 million refugees, then, ladies and gentlemen, it has a national crisis. We in Lebanon are facing a national Syrian refugee crisis. On this issue as well, we need to address the root cause ending the war in Syria is the only way to alleviate the strain of refugees on Lebanon. And the removal of Bashar al-Assad is the only way to restore stability in Syria. I believe this will happen sooner rather than later, but controlling the damage until then is indeed in the hands of the international community. Each of us may have our views on the deal with Iran, but one thing worth noting and commending is that for the first time, we saw a global collective approach on a critical issue threatening the region, and we saw the US assuming its role as a global leader. This would remain incomplete unless the same approach and leadership is applied in resolving the Syrian crisis. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I'm reminding everyone that this meeting is on the record, and when we get to question time in about 5 minutes, please identify yourself. You should put up your cards, and we will have Kendra try to identify you in the order that you put them up, and we'll call on you. Kendra, are you standing up so you can see the cards that are about to go on? All right. Let me just ask 2 questions. And also point out your most quotable line. When you said Bashar is the factory that manufactures extremism, I thought that was the most quotable line. And then you pointed out that there are 40,000 extremists versus 2 million moderate, 20 million moderate Arabs. I thought that was an extraordinary statistic. But if Bashar were sitting here, he would say he's not the factory, that these are people who have spontaneously organized and are rising up against him. How do you justify that statement, that he's the factory manufacturing?
Well, first of all, we didn't have ISIS 2 years ago or 3 years ago. When the revolution started in Syria, it was, the people's revolution who went on the streets and asked for reforms in Syria. And instead, the regime started shooting at the people. And for a whole year and a half, the people didn't react. But when they were falling by the thousands, then of course people started resisting. And ISIS, or Daesh, what you call it, only emerged a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. So it means that the problem in Syria was created by the unwillingness of Bashar al-Assad to even do reforms to start with. And today we see that it's like also what's happening in Iraq. The international, I think, in Iraq, why is there ISIS today? When the US fought Al-Qaeda, when there was Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi and there was the surge a few years back with the Sahwas and Anbar and everyone carried on that fight, Al-Qaeda was wiped out by the Sahwas. And what was expected at the time is a real partnership between the Iraqis. When you have the Sunnis, the Shia, and the Kurds implement a kind of partnership in that country. Instead, Maliki, what did he do? The very same people who fought Al-Qaeda, he fought them, put them in prisons, and he got out thousands of people from prisons, and then you have Daesh. What I'm trying to say is, today I have no illusion in my mind that the international community will, be able to defeat Daesh or ISIS. I have no, I mean, we shouldn't even contemplate whether we're going to win or not. But if in Iraq or in Syria there is no change in the way in Iraq by a true partnership, for instance, and Bashar al-Assad stays as, the dictator of Syria and keeps on killing the Syrians, then we will finish from ISIS and there will be another group worse than ISIS in Syria and in Iraq.
And my second question is, you mentioned the importance of a two-state solution. That is the policy of the United States, and it's certainly something I personally strongly support in the interests of both the Palestinians and the Israelis. What could or should Lebanon be doing to promote the two-state solution now?
I don't see what Lebanon can do if on this, on this end. But I believe the international community understands or knows that the only solution in Israel between the Palestinians and the Israelis is a two-state solution. And I believe, what is happening or what has been happening in the past years, wars that are happening between in Gaza and the Israelis, and it will only make things worse. The problem is you need leadership to move forward in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and to finalize this issue, because it is unacceptable in 2015, after so many years, 50 years and more, that has passed by, that we see the Palestinian people without a state. I mean, these people don't even have an identity.
Well, I would just add to that the Israeli dream of a pluralist Jewish state is also at risk if there's no resolution. And the Israeli people, too, I think would benefit. Their security would be enhanced. But going to questions, Barbara Slavin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, and it's a pleasure to see you. My question is twofold. What is your analysis of the internal strength of the Assad regime? We've seen reports of Rustam Ghazali dying, of security chiefs being dismissed, various coup rumors and so on. How strong do you think Assad really is now in Damascus? And is there a moderate alternative? We see that the territorial gains that have been made recently have been led by the Nusra Front. Thank you.
Thank you. For me, the regime has already fallen. It was, when Iran and Hezbollah started their interference in actually getting into the battle themselves in Al-Qusayr, this is when you could have seen the start of the end of really Bashar al-Assad. But today, the people who are fighting are a few divisions in Bashar al-Assad's army, but it is controlled totally by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and Hezbollah. The only reason today Bashar is still in Damascus is because of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and Hezbollah. If these two entities hadn't come to save Bashar al-Assad, there will be no regime today. On the second hand, also the killing of Rustam Ghazali, and obviously Bashar al-Assad has the rumors on this issue that it was partly Hezbollah who killed Rustam Ghazali or the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. We believe that there is some kind of division within the regime forces. Some do not want as much as involvement of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard inside, and some are, with. But this is a fact that we see today. We saw also beforehand other Jami'a and others were killed in Syria. So there is quite a big, regression in the regime, because we could see it on the ground. On the other hand, what was the question again?
Moderates. Where are the moderates when Nusra Front seems to be leading the fighting?
Look, I think the problem with the Syrian opposition is every time the international community has brought the Syrian opposition to unite. Okay? It happened with Maaz al-Khatib, it happened with Ahmed Jarba, and it happened, this is basically the two main figures that when the international community was really involved. The problem is they did not score any success on the ground. And this is a failure from the international community to helping this kind of moderate opposition to be able today claim those victories that are happening against the regime. And people inside, when they see promises and they don't see delivery on those promises, and they're being killed day after day, and the international community failing day after day to helping the Itilaf or the Majlis al-Watani at one point, yes, you will see them, falling into back to Nusra. But I will say, if the opposition today is united, if there is a no-fly zone, if there is real training for the Syrian army, for the Free Syrian Army, you will find the people who are in Nusra and Daesh and others flee from them, join this new army, and they will be the ones who get rid of ISIS and others.
Thank you. Paul Danahar, BBC. Sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something. I just remembered. Rustam Ghazali contacted us just before the killing. And he contacted us he wanted to go on TV and declare some things. We don't know what were they. And straight after that, we heard that he got beaten up. And but just before a day of this, of Rustam Ghazali's, he had contacted somebody I know, and we gave him the number of the TV, Future TV. He wanted to come out and declare some things, and he never got the chance. Kind of like Ghazi Kan'an, It happens, they assassinate themselves in Syria by 5 bullets sometimes.
My two questions are related. The first is, what impact has the war had on Hezbollah? And which is more important to Iran, Hezbollah or Assad? Would they sacrifice Hezbollah to keep Assad in power?
I think, I don't know how badly hurt is Hezbollah, but I think, every time a Hezbollah soldier is killed in Syria, I think Hezbollah pays the price in Lebanon. And because people are not cheap, people are not just, it's not like a box and you pick people and you throw them to battle. And people do not believe, actually, I'm one of the people who thinks that Hezbollah has made a tremendous mistake in joining the war in Syria. And I'm sure a lot of people in Lebanon, especially Shia, believe that this is a huge mistake. I think he's hurting, and he will keep on hurting as long as he's in Syria. I think if you ask me what is more important for Iran, I think the Assad regime we saw that they brought Hezbollah to Syria to save the Assad regime. So I would believe that the Assad regime is much more important.
Do you think Hezbollah had a choice in joining
No.
the effort?
Absolutely
They were
not.
directed to do it then?
Absolutely not.
Yeah. Robert Worth.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I had a question about Lebanon. Last week we saw this fairly dramatic confession by Michel Smaha about his involvement and efforts to blow things up in Lebanon. And it was a reminder to me that, Syria has, and its proxies have constrained Lebanese politics so much by violence generally. And it made me wonder whether you see any hint that might change. Might they give a little more latitude, a little more freedom for the Lebanese to organize things in their own way? And one example of that might be, I'm curious, what about you? Are you able to travel to Lebanon? Have the rules changed, in other words, in terms of what the Syrians and their proxies will allow?
You know, I think in the past you could say the Syrians and the proxies of the Syrians in Lebanon. I think Syria has become itself a proxy of Iran. So today, the main operator that heads all these proxies is Iran. So, so the decision, for instance, of not electing a president, it's not from Syria, it's from Iran. The decision of, for instance, what happened with Michel Smaha, this is a kind of Syrian intelligence operations that that goes, you know, in coordination with, you know, Iran and their proxies in Lebanon to destabilize Lebanon. On the political level, I don't think that Hezbollah or Syria have any political maneuvering without the say of Iran today. I think Iran is the one. Yeah, I mean, for instance, today we have the election of the president. Why don't we elect a president? We said we want to compromise. You know, we had our candidate, which is Samir Jaja, and they had their candidate. When we saw that our candidate could not, didn't get the numbers, we asked, I mean, himself, and we asked him to move over to get a compromise president. But they didn't, and they won't, because I believe that Iran today does not want to elect a president in Lebanon. So they can go to the international community and say, we hold the card of Lebanon, we hold the card of Syria, we hold the card of Iraq, we hold the card of Yemen. But you know, sometimes when you hold too many cards, they tend to, you know, weigh a lot, and then you might just...
Are you able to travel? Just wanted that.
Sorry?
That last question about you personally.
Yeah, I went back to Lebanon. I have to be careful, yes. There are a lot of threats on me, but you know, one has to do it. Just need to be careful.
You know, we have a best-watched miniseries here called House of Cards.
Oh, yeah.
It comes to mind as you just told that story. Hisham Melam.
What would you like the United States to do that it's not doing right now, particularly vis-a-vis Syria? Obviously, bringing down the Assad regime is not one of their priorities. What would you like them to do? And another thing, how concerned are you about Hezbollah's penetrating the armed forces of Lebanon? And there's a great deal of talk about Hezbollah's growing influence in the Lebanese armed forces.
Not true.
With certain, okay, address that.
Not true. First of all, the United States and its allies have decided to wage a war against ISIS. Is that true or not? But ISIS birth has, you know, there was a reason, and the problem, like for instance in Iraq, if ISIS or Daesh or ISIS were or Maliki was not the cause of Daesh being there, they wouldn't have asked Maliki to step down. And I think that the whole international community asked, especially the United States of America, asked Maliki to step down. So the same thing should happen in Syria. You know, you cannot wage a battle against ISIS and not wage a battle for the causes that brought ISIS in Syria. The main problem that we have, the only reason there is today extremism in Syria is because of Bashar al-Assad. I mean, we can argue and sit and say, who killed Rafiq Hariri? Was it ISIS? Who killed Muhammad Shatih? Who killed all the Lebanese? Wasn't it like the proxies of Syria? Today, isn't it Hezbollah who is, you know, who is allegedly committed that crime in Lebanon, killing Rafiq al-Hariri? This regime is built on evil and assassination and killing. He does not care. He already killed 300,000, you know, Syrians. You think he cares if he kills another 500,000 of Syrians? You think he cares if there is ISIS or Daesh or Al-Qaeda or anyone of extremism? It makes him look good, because now the international community is not focusing on him, but focusing on ISIS, whereas the international community should focus on the cause of ISIS and fight ISIS. Take me, I'm a moderate, I'm fighting ISIS, okay, but I want to fight the source of ISIS. And we consider, you know, I think if you ask all your allies in the region, everyone will tell you the cause of ISIS is Maliki and Bashar al-Assad.
Well,
Hezbollah, yeah, there is a question. About the army, you know, Hezbollah has no influence on the army. But politically, I'll tell you that Lebanon is divided. And this division will have some impact on certain decisions that the army will take vis-à-vis certain places in Lebanon. The army cannot fight Hezbollah because this is not in the interest of Lebanon, and this will cause a civil war. But I think the influence, people say there is an influence of, I don't see it. I really don't see it. I think the army has done a great job in stabilizing the borders, in fighting extremism. But at the same time, do they make mistakes? Everybody makes mistakes. And Lebanon is not in an easy position.
Okay. We have many questions to ask, so let's ask one question each, please. Jay Solomon.
Thank you. Oh, thanks. Thank you. I'm interested in your thoughts on whether this pending nuclear agreement between the U.S. and Iran will be good for your region or more destabilizing, in the sense that the U.S. officials will say, okay, they're going to get rid of the Iranian, or at least cap Iran's nuclear program. But I know there's a lot of concern amongst the Arab leaders that most of that infrastructure will remain in place, and over the next year or 2 years, there's going to be $100 billion plus more money going to Iran that they could use to pay for their proxies in Syria, for Hezbollah, for militias inside Iraq. So how do you view this possible agreement? Is it going to be beneficial to your region, or is it going to make it worse? Thank you.
I think, you know, Lebanon, whether it is a good deal, I think the nuclear deal is something that could be good for the region if Iran stops really seriously building a bomb. Okay, because I think if Iran builds a bomb, then the whole region will build bombs, and have nobody should have any illusion about this. If they have the bomb, even with this agreement, the whole region will turn nuclear. So this is one thing. On the other hand, you tell me, if Iran is doing all what it's doing with the very little money they have, which I think, you know, they've spent billions of dollars in Iraq and, I mean, in Syria and Lebanon. If they receive money, I think, you know, each one has its share of the proxies. And is it going to be a good thing for Lebanon? If Iran stays in that behavior, no, it's not going to be good for Lebanon. If Iran changes its behavior and spends the 120 billion or 200 billion that's going to receive in building infrastructure in Iran, and schools and universities and all that, that will be good for Iran. But we all know the regime, and we all know what it has done in the past and what it might do in the future.
Margaret Warner.
Margaret Warner, thank you, Mr. Minister. I wanted to ask you about Turkey's role. They, of course, have been advocating a no-fly zone and talking about helping to train a moderate Syrian force, but what kind of role do you think they're playing?
I think, you know, Turkey has played a huge role in accepting or not accepting, but in having the opposition, the Syrian opposition, from the beginning. It was the first country who really endorsed the opposition. It has almost 1 million refugees in Turkey. I think Turkey has played in many times a very positive role. Some people put a question mark on Turkey's role. But I think the biggest problem we have is the big question mark on the international community's role about a Syria policy. If you ask anybody today, what's the Syria policy? Nobody has a Syria policy. There is no really, everybody wants to fight ISIS, you know, because this is the threat. But go back 1.5 years. There was no ISIS. What did you do? What did the international community do? The only thing the international community did is say that Bashar al-Assad is no longer acceptable in the international community. But anything done on the ground, nothing.
But I mean, given where we are now,
what
Turkey's
role?
role?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, they've also been very much criticized for allowing too many foreign fighters or ISIS wannabes to come through Turkey and join up.
Of course. I think you know, a lot of people came from Turkey, from Iraq, from Lebanon, from everywhere in the region. I think if today there is a decision to be taken of a no-fly zone on the side of the international community, you will find Turkey one of the first countries that is going to be having a lot of impact on the Syrian, whether it's ISIS or the regime. The problem with I think the Turks have is they want to fight ISIS, but they want to fight Bashar al-Assad. When the international community comes and says to Turkey, we want you only to fight ISIS, Turkey is going to tell the international community, thank you, but no thank you. I will protect my borders from ISIS, but if you're going to fight ISIS only, no, I think Bashar al-Assad is to be fought first.
Okay, isn't there also a Kurdish issue with the Turks, by the way?
Yeah, but the main problem in Turkey is not the Kurdish. I think the main problem Turkey has with the international community is the international community is saying, we will fly our planes, we will hit ISIS, but we will not touch Bashar al-Assad. And this is not acceptable for the Turks.
Thank you. We have 5 more questions, and we'll have to cut it off at that. Please ask one question. Aaron Miller.
Mr. Hariri, thanks for coming to the Wilson Center. It's good to see you again. You live in the neighborhood, we don't. We may understand the Middle East, we may not. I'm not entirely persuaded we do. If you had to identify one flaw or mistaken assumption that Americans continuously make about your region, what would it be?
Listen to your allies. You know, in the first invasion of Iraq, everybody said, do not go there. All your allies. And all your allies said, get rid of Bashar, and nothing happened to Bashar. So when people advise you not to go into Iraq, you just did the opposite. When people advise you to get rid of Bashar, you did the opposite. So I would say, you know, you have friends in the region, and those friends mean, you know, they have interests. It's not only about friendship, but it's about interest between the two countries. And what we see today is unfortunately, in some ways, the United States is looking only for the interest of itself and not listening to the allies.
George Cody.
Oh, never mind. Okay.
There's a mic right in front of you.
Thank you very much. It's been, I think, 10 years now since the assassination of your father, and the tribunal has been meeting recently for the past 2 or 3 years. Could you give us your assessment of how optimistic you are that, in fact, some answer will be forthcoming, and will there be any kind of indictments, and not indictments, but having people be...
Thank you. Thank you for the question also. I'm very optimistic. I think, it's the first time in Lebanon that really we have something. We have a justice system that is really investigating and going through all the motions of the case to find who assassinated Rafiq al-Hariri. But and also, Lebanon had presidents who were assassinated. They had prime ministers who were assassinated in the past, and none of it reached a conclusion. I believe that this tribunal has achieved a lot by just being there. Now, with the sessions going on and the evidence that they're getting out, a lot of things are coming out, and we know basically where it's heading. And some people say it's going slow. I believe as an international tribunal it's quite fast. But and I believe that once we have the names who allegedly killed those people, we will get them sooner or later. Milosevic, those people are not stronger than Milosevic. And Milosevic was, brought to justice, and those people will be brought to justice.
You're here. Armin Choksi, who is a member of the Wilson Cabinet.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Prime Minister. I wonder if you could tell us what you feel that the Arab countries, particularly the Sunni Arab countries, could do more that they're not doing now to stabilize the situation in Syria and, by extension, Lebanon.
I think, unfortunately, it has come to these terms, which is Sunni countries and Shia countries, where the conflict has nothing to do with Sunni and Shia. I believe the conflict is Iran is trying to push an influence of itself in the region, whether it is helping Sunnis or Shia, but it is an Iranian influence in the region. I think if we take, for instance, Syria, Syria has to have a plan where you have to unite the opposition. In parallel, you have to launch a no-fly zone. In parallel, you have to, I think the training of the Free Syrian Army has started. But once you unite the opposition and you declare a no-fly zone, believe me, half of the fighters, if not 80% of those who say they are with Nusra, because they see hope of a new Syria, they will be the first who will be joining the Free Syrian Army. And then you have definitely a new training for this new army, and they will be easily advancing on Daesh and Nusra, and definitely getting rid of Bashar al-Assad. So this is what I would, I would push those Sunni countries to do a collaboration with Turkey and the international community. And I'm sure they are ready to do that because they did it in Yemen themselves.
Yes.
I just want to add one thing, if it's okay with you. Can I?
Please.
On Yemen. One thing about Yemen, on Decisive Storm, when the operation were declared, in the Arab world, you felt a cross. I mean, in Lebanon, in Saudi Arabia, in Jordan, in people I talk to all the time, you felt something like people were euphoric in a way. It's finally somebody standing up to Iran. Somebody is doing something against Iranian influence in the region. Where it will go, it's one thing. But for instance, in Saudi Arabia, what I see that people, those youth who want to join Al-Qaeda or who want to join Daesh, they don't have to anymore. because they saw their government taking an action against Iranian influence in Yemen. If Saudi Arabia didn't take that, action, you would have found a lot of young men and women traveling to Al-Qaeda in Yemen and fight because they believe that Iran is pushing its influence in Yemen. Plus, I want to add one thing on Yemen. Why is Iran helping the Houthis? Is it because they think they are underprivileged, or they are looking at this issue on a humanitarian level? Come on. Next is Saudi Arabia. So if Saudi Arabia didn't do this action, this is what's going to happen, I think.
Final question from Marina Ottaway.
Thank you very much. You have stressed repeatedly the importance of getting rid of Assad in this fight. Do you think the present plans, what the United States is talking about, doing about training more of the moderate opposition and so on, can bear fruit in a reasonable amount of time? Because it seems to me the whole process is proceeding at a glacial pace. What can the U.S. really do?
No, I don't think this is the way to move forward. I think the way to move forward is to do a three-step plan. Unite the opposition, declare a no-fly zone, and train the Free Syrian Army. You have to do the... You see, the problem with the Syrian moderate opposition, if you declare a united Syrian moderate opposition, and that does not have any success on the ground or achievements on the ground, then you will have a redivided opposition. The key issue about this whole plan is to do things parallel. You need people to look up to the moderates, and the only way they will look up to the moderates is that there is an action plan with a no-fly zone, with a lot of training and arming the Free Syrian Army. And this is how you first of all, you get rid of extremism. Second of all, you get rid of Bashar al-Assad. Third of all, you give hope to the Syrian people that there is a real action being done to save the Syrian people from Bashar al-Assad.
Mr. Prime Minister, we praise in this country straight talk. We don't always have it, but we praise it.
I told you I took my true pill, the truth pill.
You took your truth pill.
I just spilled over.
I think everyone here would agree that we got straight talk on the record, and that is a very prized thing in this town. It also came from somebody who has paid a price in his country, both in terms of the tragic loss of his father and his own political circumstances. It's reassuring to me, and I think to everyone here, to have your voice and your clear voice, not only about the problems in your country, but the problems in the region and what needs to be done, not just by our country, but by the 20 million moderate Muslims in the region. And so on behalf of the Wilson Center and on behalf of many of your good friends in Washington, thank you for your straight talk. We need more of it in this town. Please come back soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Really
superb. Going back to Yemen anytime soon?
Yes, I'm a fellow here. Yeah.
It wasn't too bad.
That was
Let's
really
have coffee or lunch or something. That would be great.
Good. Hope to see you in the region.
Asking to go on future.